You are listening to the Vocal Advancement Podcast, and I am one of your hosts, Tom, joined by my lovely co-host, Heather. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going well.
Yeah?
It's been a busy week. We've been doing a lot of recording this week, haven't we, Tom? We've been doing a lot of interviews this week.
It's been great.
Some really...
I've learned loads.
Yeah, I love it. We do love these. We always tell our guests when they come in that, you know, our podcast is really just our own little selfish way of asking all the questions we have.
Yeah, it's like a private one-to-one lesson.
It is. And I mean, I'm being genuine about that. I'm like, I have questions that I want to ask. There are things I want to know.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you take advantage of the opportunity? You know, the people that we're talking to like put the question to them, because, you know, we've said this before. Somebody out there will be thinking the same question as us. You know, somebody will want to know.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, that's how
I'd hope so.
Yeah, that's how I reassure myself. Somebody else must want to know that.
And if you didn't know that you wanted to know, you will once you start to hear the answers to the things that we want to know about.
Yeah. But yeah, we've had a really interesting week with some really diverse topics. Like, we've gone from kind of one side of the fence to the other side to then sitting on the fence. That's a funny analogy, but you know what? Like, we've had some really interesting topics.
Let's not sit on the fence, Tom.
We've been over here, we've been over there, we've talked to this person.
I love it. And today's guest is the lovely Lynn Maxfield.
Yeah.
And he came to do a class for us online, and he was talking mostly about motor learning and how it applies to what we do as voice teachers. And this is a subject that I get really geeky over because I love me a bit of cognitive science. I've always been fascinated by how we learn things and how different people have different preferences, and whether there are certain generalities that we can apply to learning to help people learn just anything, actually, in general. You know, because obviously we as voice teachers are helping our singers to learn to sing, hopefully better, not worse. But also within IVA, you know, I spend a lot of time helping teachers learn how to teach other singers, which is a slightly different thing altogether. There's a difference between learning how to teach singers and learning how to teach teachers.
Yeah, it's a totally different skill set.
Yeah, and so, like I say, I'm constantly trying to figure out, well, what can we do to make it easier for people to consume information, easier for people to understand concepts, and then for our singers, how do we make it easier for them to replicate all the things that we do in the voice studio when they go out and they start gigging or they're, you know, performing, auditioning? How can we help it sink in, essentially? And so this is very much what Lynn came to talk to us about.
Yeah. And yeah, there was a little tidbit in there that we both were like, oh, I didn't know that. Wasn't there?
Oh, yes. We won't tell you what it was.
You have to listen.
You can listen out. That was definitely my takeaway. But you listen to the interview and see whether you take away the same little genius bit of information that I did.
Yeah, so let's talk to Lynn then.
Let's do it.
So Lynn, thank you for joining us today on our podcast. We are looking forward to getting to know you a bit more.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. Pleasure to join you.
So I wonder if you could maybe tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got started on your journey.
Yeah, sure. So my background is in singing. I went to undergraduate at a very small little liberal arts school, intending to be the next great operatic tenor, and carried that on into my graduate school. But in between, I completed a secondary music education certification. So I started getting really interested in how people learn, and sort of the educational psychology standpoint. And then while I was at the University of Iowa on my master's program, I took a course called Principles of Voice Production, taught by the great Ingo Tietze, which rekindled the love of sort of the hard sciences in me a little bit. And so I took that route and completed a PhD in voice pedagogy there, and landed here at the University of Utah at the National Center for Voice and Speech at the time, and been here for, 13 years now. So we are now the Utah Center for Vocology, of which I'm the director, and also hold a faculty appointment, associate professor faculty appointment in the School of Music.
Wow.
That's a lot to have completed.
Yeah.
You only look about 25.
Oh, that's very kind of you. I was actually just lamenting to my coworker this morning how I realized that my hair now matches my sweater. But that didn't used to be the case. I'm not sure whether it's the job or my kids, but one or the other.
Oh, so. Definitely the kids.
Yeah, for sure.
So then, you've researched and you've looked into so many different areas. Like, are you just one of those people that just wants to know a little bit about everything?
Yeah. That's a nice way. That's a nice way of saying jack of all trades, master of none. Right. That's the downside to it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been curious about how the body works and how our voice works. You know, the underlying biomechanisms of voice production, but I can't get away from the cognitive aspects of how do we control the voice, and more importantly, how do we learn to control our voice? You know, what does that process look like? You know, I was joking. I was on an email chain with Kitty Verdellini and Timothy Lee a little while ago, and Timothy Lee was a co-author on sort of the Bible for motor control and learning. And I joked with him that I started this path in my PhD. My PhD dissertation was on the application of motor learning principles to the classical voice studio. And I joked that I started this not knowing what I didn't know. And that list of things that I don't know has only grown. It's just gotten worse and worse. So, you know, that's the nature of curiosity, right? It takes you in directions and you realize that there is no end to that chain of investigation.
So tell me then, what was the key thing that you kind of discovered? What was the aha moment that came out of that PhD for you?
Wow.
Yeah.
Hi. Really, I think it's based in that understanding of, man, this system is so complex. The cognitive system and the neuromuscular control system is so complex that any little piece of investigation and any little piece of data that we get will never be the one piece that moves us to the next level of understanding. It's all incremental and can be unsatisfyingly slow. And that's not exciting, right? That's not an exciting answer, but it's realistic. I think it's what we forget when we see pop science writing now, and we think, oh, everything has to have this great, huge impact immediately, and that's so rarely the case. But yeah, I think that was my aha moment. But the area of the focus was, if I could maybe say another aha moment, the area of focus was particularly around feedback and how we provide feedback in the studio, because at the time the data were pretty clear from sports science that limiting the amount of feedback that we give to our students during the learning process is beneficial for the act of learning. It may be degrading performance in the moment, but But the aha moment was as I observed more and more lessons, how much I realized we really like to give feedback as voice teachers, right?
Yep.
We do not like dead air space in our studio. And so that's a real challenge behaviorally for us, just to learn to like sit on our thumbs a little bit and say, okay, try it again. And so that's
why do you think that is? Why do you
function.
think we're so desperate to feedback constantly?
Well, I think it's a two-way street. Our students are paying good money and are paying good effort to learn something from us. Mm-hmm. And so they expect something from us, and so it can be a challenge to get them to buy into the fact that I'm not going to give you as much. And so when we know that they expect that, then we want to meet that. And then the other side of it is our pure own ego of saying, I have something of value. I've worked hard to learn these little tidbits of advice or guidance, and I want to show you them. So it's a two-pronged problem for us, I think. That's my best opinion anyway.
Absolutely. So what, for you, if we're talking about delivering feedback to singers, what to you is an ideal amount, frequency, kind of level of feedback to give a singer whilst they're learning a new skill within the field of singing? Yeah.
I think what I've learned is that it's a bit of a sliding scale where early on, if you weigh the complexity of the task that you're asking the student to produce against their current ability, and that turns out that it's quite a difficult skill for that person's particular ability at the moment, then they're early on in the learning stage. They may need a little bit more feedback. But as they get more skilled in comparison to the task that we're asking them or that we're introducing to them, then we can pare that back more and more. But even at that low end, at the beginning end of the learning process, there's a lot of value in allowing them time before they get feedback. So even if you're still going to give them feedback every time or every other time they try something, providing 5 or 6 seconds of space between their completion of their attempt and your feedback is essential. But if you sit here and think 5 seconds, in a podcast, that's a terribly long time.
Space.
Right?
I know.
So much time. And when you have that student in front of you, 5 seconds feels like an eternity. And so that I'm just giving the caveat of this isn't going to feel, if you decide to practice this in your teaching, and I hope you do, it's going to feel weird and your students are not going to love it at first. And so they have to get on board a little bit. So your question is how much or how frequently at least. And the question of frequency is sliding, but the timing of the feedback is, I think, a little bit more concrete. And we know that a 5 to 6 second delay in timing is the amount of time that they need to process what they just did and and weigh it against what they expected to happen. And this is all happening subconsciously. And then create their own new pathways to adjust to that discrepancy between what they wanted to have happen and what actually happened. That time is critical.
Is that something that you would actively tell them to do? So maybe at the beginning of a first lesson, you might explain, I'm going to pause after everything and I'm just going to give you space to allow you to process. And I want you to think about this, this, and this. Or is it completely unprompted? Let's let it happen subconsciously.
Yes and no. I do tell them, I warn them that this is going to happen, because as we just demonstrated, 5 seconds, if I don't say something in 5 seconds, they will, right? They're going to jump in and do something. So I warn them that that's going to happen. And I may give them something global or maybe not global, but something broad to pay attention to, saying, I want you to think about the sensation from the neck up, right? Or if we're focusing something lower. But I don't want to be too prescriptive, because I want to leave this in the subconscious domain as much as possible. I want this is again coming from Kitty Verdolini. She points out that there's a difference between cognition and consciousness. And cognition is all of the neuroscience and all the neuromuscular control that is happening between the time I say I want to do this and that I actually do it. But the consciousness is the real level of awareness of all of that. And she points out that consciousness is a very small cognitive workspace. And so when we draw people into a consciousness state, we can only focus on 3, 4, 5, or 6 things at a time, and they have to happen serially. We have to pay attention to one, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. But if we can remain in the subconscious domain, then to the best of our knowledge, everything can happen in parallel, and it can be weighing those outcomes against the desired outcomes in parallel and rapidly, with essentially a supercomputer with no known parameters, right? No known constraints. It can do all of this. So we want to keep them out of that conscious domain as much as possible. But sometimes, obviously, we have to give them some direction at some point, right? Learning doesn't just happen spontaneously, as much as I'd like it to. Ooh, maybe there's a caveat on that, but anyway, that's
it's really
always a caveat.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, like that concept of the 5-6 seconds to process it, because when you say it, it sounds like a really long time, especially when you did the gap. But actually, when you consider what the person's processing, it doesn't actually feel like it's very long at all. Yeah, especially right. Especially if we think consciously through all of the information that they have to process, it becomes overwhelming, right? Yeah.
And so, giving that amount of time to sort of go through it is really, really valuable. And we're also really bad at it. There's a new, recent, maybe 3 years old dissertation from Colin Johnson at Shenandoah University. He got his degree there. And he went and observed a whole bunch of singing studios and observed and sort of notated when their data collection or when their feedback started. And it was, I think, I'm going to misquote the number. Go find his dissertation and read it, Colin Johnson. But it was something like 90% of feedback actually started before the person had stopped singing. So wow. We'd call that immediate or even concurrent feedback. We didn't even wait for them to fully finish the attempt before we were jumping in with our guidance. So
it's madness, isn't it? Is that I mean, I'm assuming most of that is visual feedback, maybe using facial expressions or gestures or something, or is that them actually butting in and talking over the singing?
Interestingly, I believe his was entirely verbal feedback.
Oh no!
His observations were entirely verbal feedback. But the question of the visual feedback is really interesting too, because that's even harder to control, right?
Yeah. I always try and keep my poker face.
I still. Oh yeah, right. I mean, I've been studying this now for 13 years since I completed the PhD. I know this stuff. I know that 5 seconds is so valuable, and I still find myself every lesson going, while they're singing, right in the middle of it, going,
Yeah.
and that's totally disruptive to the process.
I love a good thumbs up.
I do too. I do too. But what we believe is that the thumbs up would be better placed after they've done it.
Like 5 minutes, 5 seconds later.
Right. Yeah, 5 seconds later.
Oh my word! I dread to think
know,
what people would see if they came and watched me teach. It's just terrifying.
Same. Yeah, I've never volunteered to be recorded while I was doing it. Right? But you can think about this a little bit more nuanced, because if you've got somebody who's attempting, say their skill attempt is an entire song that's 4.5 or 5.5 minutes long, they won't remember what they did, at the very beginning of that song. So this holds true for smaller chunks of tasks, but I think the jury is still a little bit out about how does this fit when you're working with larger skills or skills that take longer periods of time. Or, I mean, in reality, I guess what that really is a whole bunch of skills changed together into the song, right? So the one song is not a skill; it's all of these little bits.
Yeah, and I guess that is a big question within the whole field of applying the motor learning research to singing, because so much of the research was done not in singing. So much of the research was done on golf swings or, netball, basketball, whatever, that sort of thing, which is so much more, I don't want to say simplistic, but it's not as complex as the myriad of things that we need to coordinate in order to sing. So I just wanted your opinion on that whole can of worms.
It is indeed a can of worms. And I would say that, something like a golf swing or even a tennis racket swing or something is still quite complex, and a whole lot of things rapidly adjusting, a whole lot of tasks tied together. And so in that respect, it's better than like the original ones, the earlier research, which was like point at a dot, and it was a very gross motor skill that we were observing. So it's gotten better, but there is certainly a lot of room for improving our science in this way. That said, I think, and maybe, I don't know, you could probably interpret this as sort of self-protection here, a little bit of what I know and that I still think it holds value. But I do think if we want to step back and because it is such a complex task, if we want to step back and wait for cognitive science or neuroscience to answer the question for the whole system before we try to apply it, we're going to be waiting forever. Quite literally, we'll never be there, right? In our lifetimes, we will never fully map cognition and the mind. I don't think. So it's useful to take the bits that do apply and try, or that we think might apply, and practice with them. And I would love to see more controlled studies of this, but they're challenging for good reason. I mean, my dissertation is one of a handful, a very small handful that tried, and I haven't replicated it because it was a really challenging exercise, and what I learned from it made it even more challenging to replicate, because I said, boy, that's still not entirely ecologically valid. So your question, I think
in the world of singing, I mean, there's never going to be that. You can't get a baseline where everyone starts at exactly the same point and is aiming for exactly the same point. It's just impossible.
No, and I think in many respects too, there are too many elements of a vocal performance that we're simultaneously evaluating to ever say that's the perfect outcome. That is the correct solution, because there's so much subjectivity to it. That's the sound I want to hear there. That's the tone quality. That's the vowel. That's the breath management. There's so many different things. So in that respect, if we're going to replicate any of these studies, we're going to have to isolate individual elements of the performance and test them, because the whole performance is just too big.
Too big
in my eyes. It's like asking you to apply motor learning principles to the entirety of a basketball game, right? To one player's entire performance in a basketball game, and that's just not possible. But a free throw, yeah, we can probably do that.
What about, so just thinking about this from a different perspective, what about when we're, maybe at home alone practicing and we complete an exercise? Is that 5-second rule still, should we be keeping quiet when we finish to give ourselves some time to process, or is it only in a kind of lesson and feedback situation?
Well, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that, because we've been in the discussion focused primarily on augmented feedback. So that's the feedback that comes from outside of your body somehow. But I do think, I can't think of an argument of why you wouldn't still benefit from some time between tasks. That's a great point. I'm not sure I've looked into that yet at all.
I love that he's making a note now.
I'm writing it down.
That's it. Watch this space.
Well, yeah, because it calls into the question of the value of practice without feedback, and the quality of that practice without feedback. We can't possibly be in the room with our singers all the time, and so we require them to practice outside. But what is it that they're doing during that time, and how does that apply to the question of motor learning principles? That's a new area for me. Somebody else is probably in that domain, and I can't wait to find them. That's really interesting.
So as well as that whole topic of feedback, I mean, I guess another big area that gets talked about when you look into the motor learning literature is this locus of attention, like how much attention to put into your singing, what to put your attention on, and how that might affect how well you acquire a motor skill. Can you talk to us a little bit about, what your insights are on that subject as well?
Yeah, it's still a little bit hotly debated as well. Particularly the question of an internal locus of attention versus an external locus of attention, and what we believe we are seeing is that if you had to choose one or the other, that an external locus of attention would be preferable for learning. But Lynn Helding made a compelling case for when you're early on in a skill acquisition, you kind of have to pay attention to the steps along the way. You can't simply wait for the output and weigh everything against the output. She puts it in terms of you can't go with the flow until there is a flow, right? Until you've developed some flow. But I think the questions are of what in the motor programming is automatic, and what of it is simply subconscious. The automatic doesn't necessarily equate to subconscious, because the automatic means that it just happens without any sort of repetition or learning having happened. But the learning can still happen subconsciously, as we were discussing earlier, the mapping of that new pathway, that new motor program, can happen subconsciously without a lot of conscious awareness of the mechanisms. So I think the best way that I have come to view this question is less about an external versus internal, but more about am I focusing on the mechanism, or am I focusing on the output, right, or the result of the mechanism? And a good mix is usually what I end up with, particularly when I'm teaching. The bulk of my singers I fall into two categories: undergraduate performance majors or avocational older singers. Those are the two groups that I seem to be teaching most frequently. Mm-hmm. And both of those groups are not professionals, are not really high level performance athletes yet, right? There's a lot of learning still to be done at both mm-hmm. of those stages. So in those populations, I have found that giving them a locus of attention that is more directed toward mechanisms, or at least elements of the mechanism that are under their direct control, that they can change, is still beneficial, while still also drawing their attention to what did that sound like, or more appropriately, what did that feel like? I think that's the challenge for singing, and I'd love to hear you guys weigh in on this as well. But if we're talking about the outcome, if we only want to view or pay attention to the outcome of our attempt, what is that outcome? Because it can't be what it sounds like unless you are recording it and playing it back for yourself, mm-hmm. because it's just so inaccurate. But what do you guys think about that? I'm putting you guys back on the spot.
Wow.
Oh, well, I agree. I think combination is always the way. I think anything that's too binary gets, a little bit too prescriptive. And so every case is individual. There are moments where getting someone to think about what their tongue is doing is incredibly helpful. That would be seen as an internal focus because we're looking, at something on the inside. There are other times where getting someone to focus straight ahead of them so that they're not thinking up to notes or down to notes, but straight ahead can be incredibly helpful. And that's more of an external focus of attention. I would use both. I would use both of those things depending on the situation. I actually read a paper recently, and I can't remember whose paper it was, but I think it was either a netball or a basketball study where they had concluded that an internal focus on the run-up to the action, followed by an external focus whilst doing the action, was the magic combination. And I was like, okay, I quite like that. That was quite a nice kind of a different take on the situation. Again, just combining things.
Yeah, I think I'm familiar with that paper, and I wonder if it is as much about the rapidity, the timing of the elements of the motor task running up. Is you can pay attention or direct attention toward these things that are moving relatively slow, right? Building up toward that basketball shot is something you can control individual elements. But once you go into the actual shot, things move very rapidly and the adjustments happen very, very rapidly. Similarly with the tongue, right? If you're holding a vowel, you can change that shape of that tongue or with a positioning or tension or whatever. But if you're in a connected speech in a patter song or something that's moving really fast, you cannot pay attention to your tongue or you'll start tripping up on it, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, and I don't know the answer, but I wonder if there is a tipping point, if there's a triggering point of when you can and when you can no longer. There has to be, and it has to be related to the timing of our neuromuscular control.
Yeah.
Interesting. See, I should talk to you guys. I should talk to you folks every couple of weeks, and we'll have all sorts of research
spiraling
ideas.
Off. I mean, I find it fascinating as well. I love this topic. It's something that I really geek out over as well. I love how can I help people learn, and I do think it differs from person to person, and so hard and fast rules are never going to be the answer, but it's also useful to have generalizations. As with everything in singing, if we know the general rule of, oh, well, this vowel will do this and this consonant will do this, then we have a better understanding in general, but also understanding that there are always exceptions to the rules and you have to be able to be flexible with the person in front of you. I think that's always going to be the case.
I mean, if we can make a really nice parallel here from teaching to motor performance. And for motor performance, we have a set of general rules that have been set. We have this schema that has been developed over time and through practice that is set and ready to run off. And when we're teaching, we have our set of skills that we know are generally applicable. But when you run that motor program, you've got all of the elements of the room and of that particular performance, of how dry my mouth is, all these new inputs that have to and the body has to make adjustments to that motor program on the fly. And when you have a singer that steps into your studio that is completely different, or is unique, you're going to make adjustments to your teaching motor program. And I think that's just how we have to run. But that's the beauty. I don't know. For me, that's the fun of teaching individually, is I get to do that. Right.
Absolutely.
Coming from my music education background, when I was teaching middle school band, you don't get that individuality, right? I couldn't spend the time with the one-on-one students. It was just what's best for the masses here. And for the record, I loved middle school band. That was the best. They were so much fun. They were like funny and genuinely still interested enough to do, to really put their heart in it. I loved it. It was a lot of fun.
Love that.
Nice. So, kind of as a final thought, just you were talking there. You work with two kind of camps of singers. So, what does a typical singing lesson with yourself look like?
What I do try to emphasize in my first few meetings and over the first 6 months that we're working together, try to really bring them along that a singing lesson can't be just come in and sing for me. And go on autopilot. Nor is it going to be me spoon feeding you the result or the solution to every problem that you've got. They have to come in a headspace and with enough preparation to be ready to work. And sometimes that's not possible, right? Sometimes they come in and they can't get to that dedicated headspace to work, and so we don't, right? Then we find other things to work on, and I make my mental note. I usually don't say anything, but I mentally note that I'm not expecting great things out of it. It's just not there, right? They were out late at a game last night or whatever it was.
Student life.
Yes,
that's
indeed.
That's even worse in the UK because they've all been out drinking the night before. They're all drinking age.
Yes, exactly. They're having, at least half of ours are supposedly not drinking age here. But I did have one student who was a very large American football fan, and he would go to every home game on Saturday, and we had lessons on Monday, and he would just yell himself hoarse his whole freshman year. And I told him every time, reminded him. And, one of the things that the National Center for Voice and Speech studied way back was how the vocal folds themselves respond to that sort of really challenging vocal behavior, vocal loading. And what they found was that the swelling peaked. The vocal fold swelling peaked at about 72 hours after.
That is interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I definitely saw that with this singer, because he'd come in at 9 o'clock on Monday morning or 10 o'clock Monday morning, and it was like right at that peak. Boy, it's not good. We had a lot of heart-to-hearts about what you have to choose, the choices you have to make if you really want to be if you want to pursue this.
Yeah.
But we worked it out. He figured it out. So
anyway, now I'm rethinking all of my nights out from now on. I'm like 72 hours. There, I was thinking just the day after our rest, I'll be all right.
Yeah. No, it keeps building. At least that's the average.
I was going to say, and I bet that's worse as you get older as well. It always gets worse as you get older.
Yeah, everything does. Everything does. But. And that's not to say that you shouldn't do it. You just know, you're right. You just knowledge is power.
Yeah. Knowledge is power, indeed.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, this is such a fascinating topic. Like, I'm sure we could probably sit here for another 2 hours and pick your brains on this topic. But if any of our listeners are maybe wanting to know a bit more about yourself or the topic, is there any resources you can point them to?
Yeah. So I would definitely point them toward if you want a textbook introduction. And it's a big textbook. Don't get me wrong. It's big, but you cannot beat Timothy Lee and Richard Schmidt's Motor Performance and Control, I think, or Motor Control and Performance. One of those other. I'll send you the link to it. It's now on to its I think 6th edition, and it walks you through all of the stages of learning of a motor program, and it provides all of this, all of the background studies in a really, really nice way. I mean, it's geared toward a college class, right? A college kinesiology class, and so that's the one that I still go back to. When I was writing, they were on their 3rd edition, so it's been a while, but I still reference that document. And, if you're interested in what we're doing, you can certainly visit us at vocology.utah.edu. That's UTAH, and see all of the things that we're currently studying. We are always doing things related to the biomechanics of voice production and voice rehabilitation and habilitation. And then I've got this really new and interesting direction that I'm heading with our research, with the center toward a better understanding of how the intersection of art and health, and how creative arts participation impacts our body function and our cognitive function. And I mean, it's a huge area, obviously, but we're partnering with our mental health institute here on campus, and with several other departments in the College of Fine Arts here to really try to dig into the mechanisms of change here. And it's fascinating and super rewarding. If you want to think about why we do what we do, it's because it's good for us as people, right?
Absolutely.
Humans crave this, and for good reason. So,
well, we need to have a conversation with you about that in the future.
Yeah.
Let me get a little bit more data, and I would love to.
Yeah.
I would love to. But
right.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, and certainly they can, if anybody wants to chat, I'm always happy to geek out a little bit.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn. It's been fantastic.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
So that was Lynn, and can I just say, what a lovely guy to talk to, like just such a nice person, but so knowledgeable and generous with that knowledge.
Yeah. And just, eager to hear what other people wanted to say as well, which I love that.
Yeah,
when people make me feel like I know something.
Yeah, I'm not used to be the interviewee asking questions of us. It puts you on the spot, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? You're like, oh, now I know how you feel.
Yeah. But no, it was it's such an interesting topic, and I found myself just sitting listening and forgetting that I was supposed to be asking questions because I was just so taken by the topic.
Meanwhile, there's me geeking out, asking even more questions.
Yeah, I'm like sitting taking notes with my post-its, like, oh, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah, oh. See, it's our own personal learning vehicle.
It is, absolutely. We love it.
But I was really... Oh, you go.
God, I was going to say, did you spot the takeaway that I took away from this? That I will now be scheduling every concert that I attend to happen. a good few more days ahead of any teaching that I have to do from now on, because 72 hours was a lot longer than I thought it was.
I know.
So that was, yeah.
That was a surprise for me. Like, similar to you probably, was just assuming, like, wake up in the morning, got a bit of swelling. Later on the day, you're fine. The next day, back to normal. But no, it's like, wake up today, 3 days later. 3 days later, 72 hours, still swollen. And in fact, did he not say that the 72 hours is the peak of the swelling?
Yeah, that's it.
So it's even longer. Like,
honestly,
it's crazy.
So
did not
you need
know
like
that.
a week off.
You do.
After you go wild. It's all right. I'll just schedule it. I don't go out that much anymore, but when I do, I'll make sure I schedule a whole week off to recover.
I know. But it's crazy.
To be honest, when you get to our age, we need that week anyway. We can't.
Yeah. Just for, like finishing a day's work, I need a week to recover.
That's it.
But it was just like, that was one of the things that I found really amazing. But the other thing that really kind of blew my mind was the couple of seconds after you've done something to process. Like, and as I said at the time to him, I was like, it feels like a really long time, but actually when you consider the sheer volume of what your body or your brain, must be processing, like it's actually not that long at all, considering all the input.
Absolutely. And I have to admit, although that's something I have heard before, I'm not very good at doing it. I can't help myself, but, kind of smile and nod when...
Well, you want to fill dead space, don't you?
I'm like, yeah, good. Well done. It's quite a challenge. And I do challenge you all to try it, with a student that you can, try that out with the first time. And just, it does make you feel very, very vulnerable almost. Like, like they're looking for you to tell them whether they got that right or not.
Yeah.
And to actually stop and go, you figure it out.
Absolutely. And, I think we're so used to giving feedback, because we do this in classes and we train people with this, but like giving feedback as you go, like visual cues and feedback, and then feedback afterwards. So I think we kind of just assume, you're doing, that's really good, keep going, blah, blah, blah. But it's a totally different way of thinking, to stop and pause. And then I could see myself sitting on Zoom and the person would be like, oh, did I lose you? Are you still there? Did you get cut off?
Absolutely. And I mean, I do, this is something that I have definitely adapted into my teaching, is that I do feedback significantly less to my more advanced singers than I do to my beginner singers. So I do, rather than necessarily telling them how to adapt and change to do a better attempt at something, I'm more inclined nowadays to go, let's have another go at that. Let's just try that again. And see whether they join the dots and figure out what they need to adjust to get a better attempt at something. And I have noticed that does really work quite nicely for those more advanced singers, because then they go away feeling empowered that, okay, I've got the tools to do this myself. Because what you can find is that, and what we want to really avoid, is students becoming so codependent on their teacher that they feel like the only time they can ever do it is if they're in a voice lesson. That should not be what we're going for. I mean, financially that might work because they'll come to you for more lessons.
That's a good business model.
It's a good business model, but I don't know that it's particularly ethical.
Yeah, you don't want, like, you don't want to create that reliance on yourself. Like, I don't think it should be like a never-ending loop of voice lessons. Like,
No.
you want a point where the singer's kind of self-sufficient to know this happened, I need to do this, you know. They always need a tune-up and come
Absolutely.
back to us and stuff, but, you know.
Definitely. And I say that when people, ask me, as they always do, like, how often should I be taking lessons? My general answer to that question is always, when you're first starting out, have them as frequently as you can, as you can afford to come. And then as you develop and you gain those skills and you get a little bit more, efficient with it, you're actually better off spacing the lessons further apart so that you have more time to digest and play with the concepts yourself before you come back to check in and see how you're getting on. Which is another way to really enable them to feel like, okay, I'm empowered to try these things out by myself at home.
Yeah.
I don't need to come in every week to see you.
I think, I give similar advice to my singers, and I have noticed certain, and maybe it's a personality thing, but I have noticed sometimes weekly students who I don't need to practice because I see you every week,
That's a very good point.
And so that space between forces them to have to go away and figure things out on their own, because sometimes they do just need to go away and figure it out on their own. We can give them all the tools and all the knowledge and all that, but sometimes they do just need that time to process it on their own and figure it out. And certainly myself, that's been the case for me sometimes, that I'm not going to get this in this lesson, but I'll go away practice for a week and come back and like, I got it. I just needed to sleep on it and think about it and let my brain digest,
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how much work the brain does when we are sleeping, actually.
Yeah.
How much processing is taking place, how much of the day the brain is, just kind of figuring out and filing away. And
it's just why sleep is so important, because all of that processing that goes on at night and assimilation of the new knowledge and the new pathways that are forming and things in your brain, like it's really important. If you don't get that sleep, the skills do not stick as much as somebody that gets the time to process it. And so it makes me think like, the night after lesson, nice early bed, face mask, relaxing oils, I need my brain sleep.
I was going to say, can you tell my children that, please, Tom? For some reason, they don't like sleep. I just don't get it myself.
Oh,
I
wow.
love sleep.
I love sleep too. Yeah, I love sleep, and I actually wind my partner up. We have jokes about this. Like, he's the kind of person that like 15, 20 seconds out for the count snoring. And like, I always wind him up about it. And I like, he thinks it's because it's a bad thing. I'm like, no, I'm just jealous. Because, it takes me like 5 minutes. But, he can fall.
My husband's the same. As soon as his head's on the pillow, he's snoring.
Yeah. It's a skill. I think that's a skill to
skill.
brag about, I think, these days.
It is. I thought that he's just so exhausted.
Had enough. Pass out.
That's it. I love it.
I know. But yeah, that was up there in one of my favourite conversations in terms of topic with Lynn. And I think his new study that he was talking about is really a very interesting topic. And so I hope he'll come back and talk to us when he's a bit further down the line.
Yeah, we'll have to invite him back another time, definitely.
Yeah.
Pick his brains a bit more. That would be great.
And I want to know the answer to my question that he couldn't answer.
He's going to go away and research it, though. That's the thing.
I know, but like that's because we were talking about, asking questions and hoping that other people think them. Like that, I can't be the only person that must have thought of that, but it's interesting that that's something that they've never thought about, So I wanted to say, like, I'll take credit on the paper, just, seeding the idea.
But that's when you get these people whose full-time job it is just to research stuff. I mean, that's quite a cool job.
Yeah.
I think that's quite cool. It'd be quite fun to do that. They're constantly seeking for like, where do we take this next? What can we look into next? What's going to be most beneficial for people to know? And it takes so long to put together one tiny bit of information in one research paper that, it's a constant kind of searching for new ideas. And so actually having somebody mention something or ask a question from the outside does make them go, oh, actually, that might be a good thing to focus on.
Well, I think it's like anything, isn't it? When you spend your life immersed in it, there's things that you start to miss because you're looking at it so much. And I find like with work. I do the same. Like I look at something so much and I can't figure it out, and then somebody comes in 2 seconds like, oh, there it's there, and you're like, I've been looking at that for 2 hours. And you found it in 3 seconds. Okay.
That's it. The outside set of eyes. I love it.
But yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. As I say, it's up there, one of my favorite topics to discuss. And if you are interested in the topic, Lynn did do a webinar for us, and you can get a recording to watch. Yeah,
and we got some good feedback on that one. People found it really useful.
Yeah, that was really well attended, and the feedback was excellent. So yeah, if you're interested in watching that webinar, we'll pop a link in the show notes. But if you're also interested in more things like that, you can join our membership, which is called The List, and it's full of stuff like that, all these recordings and guests, webinars and stuff like that. So we'll put some details in the show notes about that too.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's a great resource.
Fantastic. So don't forget to make sure you're all subscribed up so that you get notified when our next episode drops. How do people do that, Tom?
Yeah, so whenever you're listening to this, look for the follow or the subscribe button and make sure that you click it. And then when the next episode comes out, you'll get told about it so that you can get in on the action. And you can watch the videos on YouTube as well. So get to our YouTube channel, just search for Vocal Advancement Podcast. And then you can subscribe there and then watch the videos as they come out. So you can see the shenanigans.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's been lovely talking with you all today.
Yes, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. And you'll come back because, like we said, we've got lots more interesting stuff coming up.
Oh, some juicy topics to talk about in the coming episodes. So don't miss out.
Yeah. So take care of yourselves and we'll see you next time.
See you soon.